On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel did something the world had debated for over 40 years. They struck Iran directly. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was assassinated within hours. Within just days, Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that literally carries a fifth of the world's oil. And within weeks, the U.S. initiated the largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. It's a completely staggering sequence of events. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to explore the massive question that nobody has fully answered yet. What happens if this stops being an air and naval war and actually becomes a full-scale ground invasion?
Okay, let's dive into this. We need to get one thing straight before we go any further. This is not some abstract thought experiment. As of this explainer, the US and Iran have been at war for months, and the escalation has been brutal. In February, US and Israeli strikes hit over 2,500 Iranian military and government sites in a single opening salvo. By March, Iran retaliates with massive missile barrages and starts laying naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz. April, the US slaps a full naval blockade on Iranian ports. In May, a massive U.S. aerial campaign kicks off to force that strait back open. And now, in July, airstrikes have temporarily paused and talks are underway. But look really closely at what is missing from this timeline.
Despite all of this unprecedented chaos, the bombings and the blockades, American troops have never crossed into Iranian territory in force. That is the uncrossed line, and it's exactly what we're focusing on today. Because honestly, we need a major reality check right here. Bombing a country from the sky and actually occupying it on the ground, they are totally different wars. I mean, not even close. And this brilliantly illustrates why military planners lose sleep over this. People tend to look back at the 2003 invasion of Iraq as the baseline for a Middle Eastern ground war. But comparing Iraq in 2003 to Iran today, it's like comparing a local thunderstorm to a Category 5 hurricane. Iraq had a familiar scale, relatively known logistics. Iran is an entirely unprecedented scale and an absolute geographical nightmare for an invading force. Let's talk about the geography for a second. Iran is roughly 3 times the size of Iraq, 3 times the landmass to cover, secure, and supply. And we aren't just talking about flat, open desert. The terrain is absolutely brutal. You've got the Zagros Mountains forming this massive, natural, fortified wall right along the western border. And even if you make it past the mountains, the interior is full of high desert plateaus that are super easy to defend and just utterly miserable to cross. Then, factor in the population. Iran has over 90 million people. Military analysts are incredibly blunt about this. If your goal is a full invasion aimed at regime change, you aren't sending in some small, agile strike force. You would need hundreds of thousands of troops. You're talking about years of uninterrupted logistical nightmares just to maintain a basic foothold. Which leads us to the phrase that politicians absolutely loathe saying out loud: an open-ended nation-building project. This is the painful, tragic lesson the U.S. learned right next door in Iraq and Afghanistan. You might win the initial firefights, sure, but a full invasion basically guarantees an open-ended occupation in a country that watched what happened in Iraq and took copious notes. So, knowing they can't match the sheer firepower of the U.S. military, how do they actually fight back? Well, Iran has spent decades, literally decades, preparing for a war they know they cannot win conventionally against the U.S. Air Force or Navy. So they built what's called an asymmetric deterrence posture. It sounds like a bunch of military jargon, but think of it like this. You don't fight a giant by trying to out-wrestle them. You fight them with a million exhausting tiny paper cuts. It's a strategy using unconventional tactics, shorter-range weapons, and harsh geography to deter and completely bog down a superior invading force. They don't have to win a clean victory. They just have to make the cost of occupying Iran so high that the invaders eventually pack up and leave. So the crucial point is how this plays out on the ground. According to defense planners, Iran would completely avoid large set-piece battles. You aren't going to see massive tank columns clashing in the desert. Instead, an invading force would walk into a buzzsaw of shorter-range missiles, relentless drone swarms, and fast attack boats harassing their supply lines. In the cities and the mountains, ambushes and IEDs everywhere. The goal is to draw the invaders deep into urban centers and turn the occupation itself into a deadly trap. And they weaponize their geography globally too, specifically the Strait of Hormuz. We've already seen this in our 2026 timeline. Iran didn't have to defeat the U.S. Navy to cause a panic. They just laid some mines and attacked a few ships. By threatening that one narrow choke point where a fifth of the world's oil flows, they can cause absolute global economic chaos without winning a single traditional battle. Which brings us to the rest of the world. Because a ground war of this magnitude doesn't happen in a vacuum. The unintended global fallout would directly hit everyday life for billions of people. We can cascade through this in 4 massive steps. Step 1 is the energy shock. Even the mere threat of a closed strait earlier in the year caused an insane energy crisis. If a full-scale ground invasion kicks off with heavy fighting around that water, we're talking about sustained oil prices rocketing into territory nobody alive has even budgeted for. Step 2 is the regional spillover. A ground war here never stays inside one border. We've already watched the air war pull in regional actors, right? Israel expanding its operations into Lebanon, Houthi strikes in Yemen threatening shipping, and constant tension for neighboring Gulf states. A U.S. invasion would basically be like pouring gasoline on all those existing fires.
Step 3 is the regime question. And there is a huge, impartial debate here. Some analysts argue that a massive ground invasion would grind down Iran's security forces and cause the government to finally collapse from within. But others warn that a foreign invasion could do the exact opposite. It could unintentionally unite a highly fractured Iranian public to fight a common invader. Honestly, nobody knows which way that goes until boots are on the ground. And underpinning all of this is step 4, the human cost. Thousands have died in the air war. A ground invasion multiplies that tragedy exponentially.
So let's talk reality. Given the staggering troop requirements, the horrific terrain, the economic chaos, and the total unpredictability of what happens to the government, would the U.S. actually do it? Well, military assessments almost universally agree, highly unlikely. There's virtually no appetite for it in Washington, and there's absolutely no clean exit strategy.
What officials have been floating instead are limited operations, sending in special forces to secure a nuclear site, or maybe locking down a strip of coastline. But here's the catch that history proves time and time again. Limited operations in the Middle East rarely, if ever, stay limited.
Which leaves us with this final, chilling thought. As the airstrikes pause and the diplomats try to talk, the real question we should be asking isn't just what happens if the U.S. invades. The real question is, how do you stop a war like this from inevitably turning into an invasion once the unstoppable momentum of conflict has already started? It's a terrifying reality for 2026. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.